I knew something was off the second I pulled into my driveway and saw the gaping hole where my mailbox used to be. Just a patch of dirt and a broken post, like someone had ripped it out in a hurry. No note, no warning, just gone. My name's Elias Hartley. I'm a civil engineer, not exactly the kind of guy who starts drama. But when drama comes knocking, or in this case, rips your federal mailbox out of the ground, you answer. I marched straight to the HOA's office, which is really just a converted garage on the corner of Maple Glen and Brookstone. And of course, there she was, Clarissa Kensington. HOA president, 40-something, bleach blonde, and armed with a clipboard like it was a weapon. She spotted me coming and already had that look on her face, the one that says she's about to say something ridiculous and truly believes it makes sense. Elias, she said, drawing out my name like gum stuck to her shoe, we had to remove your mailbox. It didn't meet the approved aesthetic guidelines. The what? She tapped her clipboard. Section B, paragraph 5. All mailboxes must conform to the community standard. Yours was rustic. It was a black metal box on a wooden post. Exactly. Rustic. I clenched my jaw. You tore out my federal mailbox without notice. That's tampering with federal property. You realize that, right? Clarissa waved her hand like I'd just said something silly. Oh, Elias, don't be dramatic. You can pick up your mail at the post office until you install one of the approved models. We even have a vendor. I looked around at the other mailboxes on the street. Half of them were different shapes and colors. You didn't remove Sandra's, I pointed. She's on the board, Clarissa said, like that explained everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You just admitted to targeting me. She raised an eyebrow. We're done here. I turned and walked away, but I wasn't done. Not even close. Clarissa and her little HOA club had forgotten what I do for a living. I design infrastructure, streets, pipes, utilities. I had mapped this entire neighborhood 10 years ago, before it even had homes. And right now, I knew something they didn't. The entire street Brookstone Lane ran over a narrow strip of land that wasn't part of the HOA. It was technically an easement granted by the original developer. To me. I'd bought it cheap back in the day, thinking I'd build a workshop there someday. Never did. But the HOA never bothered to check that detail when they paved over it. Clarissa had picked the wrong guy to mess with over a mailbox. The next morning, I filed a notice with the county to revoke public access across my easement. It was well within my rights. I submitted the paperwork, paid the fees, and had a legal barricade installed at both ends of Brookstone Lane by sunset. Neighbor cars lined up in confusion. No one could get to their homes without driving 3 blocks around and crossing over muddy utility paths. Clarissa came stomping down the street like she owned the asphalt. What is this? She shouted. I stood by the barricade, arms crossed, a copy of the easement agreement in my hand. You removed my mailbox. I removed your street access. You can't do this. Oh, but I already did. I held up the paper. Easement's been revoked. You're trespassing. Her nostrils flared. I'll have you arrested. For enforcing my property rights. I tilted my head. Go ahead. Call the cops. I'll show them the deed. Clarissa turned beet red, but she didn't move. Behind her, residents were starting to gather, murmuring, mumbling. One guy asked, Wait, we've been driving over Elias's land this whole time? Yup, I answered. And I've been real patient with it. Until someone ripped out my federally protected mailbox with no notice. Clarissa tried to rally. He's being unreasonable. We have rules. But people weren't buying it anymore. Clarissa didn't say another word that night. She turned on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking over the very pavement she no longer had legal access to. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The barricades did all the talking. By sunrise, news had traveled farther than I expected. A local courier van stopped at the end of Brookstone Lane, confused. A couple of teenagers on bikes were snapping photos of the signs I'd posted on both ends of the road. Private property access revoked by owner. Trespassers will be documented. I didn't threaten legal action. I didn't need to. I'd already met with my attorney, and the paperwork was airtight. Around mid-morning, a county inspector showed up. A guy named Brent. Tall, round-shouldered, clipboard in hand. Eyes scanning everything like he was expecting a trapdoor to open under his boots. You Elias Hartley? He asked, adjusting his ball cap. Yup. You hear about the road. He nodded. Clarissa Kensington filed a complaint. Claims you're obstructing public access. She didn't tell you it's private land? Brent sighed, flipping pages on his clipboard. She left that part out. I handed him the certified deed copy and the revocation form with the county seal still fresh. He read it carefully, not rushing. "You're within your rights," he finally said. "I'll file the findings. This isn't going away quietly, though. I'm not asking it to." He looked around, then leaned slightly closer. "Off the record, you're the third person this week to file something against that HOA. That gave me pause. Third. He nodded. One guy said they fined his daughter for drawing chalk on the driveway. Another lady, retired Air Force, had her flag taken down while she was at work. HOA claimed it violated height restrictions. I let out a low whistle. They ever win in court? Brent shook his head. They never let it get that far. They lean on people. Most just cave. Not this time. He gave me a thin smile, then walked back to his truck. As he drove off, a woman I barely knew approached from the sidewalk. Tall, silver ponytail, gardening gloves stuffed in her back pocket. "You really own the street?" she asked. "Just the part under Brookstone Lane." The HOA never purchased the easement before paving. She nodded slowly. "I'm Denise. I live on the corner. Didn't vote for Kensington, if that helps." I chuckled. "Appreciate it. You know, she tried to make me tear out my rose bushes last spring. Said they were distracting to drivers." "You're kidding." "Dead serious. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her." "Well," I said, "looks like you're not waiting anymore." That afternoon, I got a knock on the door. Not a neighbor this time. It was Officer Darnell from the city police. Broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, and a notepad in hand. "Afternoon, sir. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Sure. Let me guess, Clarissa again." "She called in a vandalism report. Claims you destroyed community infrastructure." I gestured toward the barricades. "These." "That's what she said." "Want to see the paperwork?" He nodded. I handed him the certified documents. He read them in silence, then glanced at me. "She left all this out." "Of course she did." He took a slow breath and closed the folder. "Well, from what I see here, you're not in violation of any law. But I've got to file a report anyway. Mind if I take a few photos of the signs?" "Go ahead." He snapped a few pictures, then paused. "You planning to keep the block up?" "For now, until they acknowledge they crossed a line, and replace my mailbox." He nodded again. "Fair enough. Just keep it peaceful." Later that night, I reviewed the HOA bylaws. Not out of curiosity, out of strategy. I wasn't planning on just holding the street hostage. I wanted to put an end to this nonsense for good. Clarissa's authority came from a vote held 4 years ago, where barely a tenth of the neighborhood participated. The bylaws required a quorum of 30% to validate any major decisions, yet meeting minutes showed they hadn't hit that mark in years. I printed copies of the last 5 years' minutes public record, thanks to a state transparency mandate, and started highlighting every procedural misstep. By the time I was done, I had enough violations to call into question the legitimacy of the entire board. The next morning, I visited the county clerk's office. I filed a formal petition to audit the HOA's procedural history. I also submitted a community meeting request under the Civic Accountability Act, which required HOAs to allow public member meetings within 60 days of a formal request signed by 20% of residents. I needed 20%. I got 50 within 3 days. Turns out, people had been waiting. A guy named Ron, retired firefighter, told me Clarissa had fined him for using a non-approved shade of beige on his garage door. Another woman, Camila, said her autistic son had been reported for loitering while playing with chalk on their porch. One man had been fined for replacing his fence after a storm because he didn't wait for board approval, despite it being an emergency repair. Every story fueled the fire. I created a shared drive, uploaded redacted copies of the HOA's overreach, and sent it to every homeowner with an invite link. Local journalists got a copy too. Clarissa must have gotten wind of it, because on the 5th day, I received a certified letter. It was a cease and desist from a law firm in town, Wexler and Grange, the HOA's usual bulldogs. They claimed I was damaging the HOA's reputation and obstructing access to public property. My attorney, Trina, read it and laughed. "They're bluffing. You've got facts, filings, and signatures. Let them try." I didn't just ignore the letter. I responded with a formal counterclaim: defamation, harassment, and illegal tampering with federal property in my mailbox. I included timestamps from my security camera, showing Clarissa supervising 2 board members as they took it down and loaded it into a pickup. That's when things escalated. 2 nights later, Someone dumped a load of nails across my driveway. I nearly ran over them pulling in from a shift. I checked my cameras. Grainy footage, but clear enough to make out the vehicle. A silver SUV with an HOA parking tag on the dashboard. I filed a police report. Officer Darnell returned. He looked grim this time. "This isn't just neighbor drama anymore," he said. "Tampering with a mailbox is a federal offense. And this," he pointed to the nail spread, "is criminal mischief. Possibly attempted property damage. You think it's connected? I think someone's getting desperate." 2 days after that, the HOA office Clarissa's converted garage was raided. Brent, the county inspector, had forwarded my documentation of the procedural violations and misuse of funds to the county attorney. Turns out Clarissa had been funneling a maintenance fee into a private landscaping company owned by her cousin. The invoices were padded, the work minimal, and the checks traced. The arrest wasn't dramatic. No sirens. No shouting. Just 2 plainclothes investigators, a quiet set of handcuffs, and Clarissa being led to a waiting sedan. The barricade stayed up for another week. By then, a temporary committee had been formed. Denise, Ron, Camila, the same people who'd been stepped on for years. They voted to dissolve the existing board and hold new elections. I didn't run for anything. Didn't need to. My mailbox was replaced exactly as it had been, and my easement was reinstated for public use, with a formal agreement signed and notarized. But I did one last thing before I closed the book on the whole ordeal. I had a bronze plaque installed at the edge of Brookstone Lane. It read, "Public access granted by the property owner with respect. Remember who built this street." Nobody's messed with a mailbox since. The morning after Clarissa's quiet exit from the neighborhood, I stepped outside to collect the newspaper. Yes, I still get one, and found a folded note duct taped to my front door. No envelope, just a torn sheet from a yellow legal pad, written in all caps. "You think this is over? Watch your back." No name. No signature. Just cowardice. I peeled it off, tossed it in a Ziploc, and called Trina. She told me not to touch anything else and to expect someone from the county's Special Investigations Unit. Apparently, Clarissa's arrest had triggered a full audit of the HOA's finances and inner workings, and I was now listed as a key witness. I wasn't surprised. I'd seen the cracks forming. But what came next? I didn't see that coming. 2 days later, I got a call from investigator Celeste Ng. Calm, efficient, and not remotely interested in small talk. She asked me to meet her at the county municipal building, not the precinct. "Too many ears," she said. When I arrived, she was already seated in a private conference room, files spread across the table like a chessboard in mid-play. She didn't look up right away. "You're Elias Hartley," she said, flipping through a stack of receipts. "Engineer. Owns the easement under Brookstone Lane. Filed a counterclaim against the HOA." "That's me." She slid a copy of a check across the table. "Recognize this?" The name at the top was Wexler Property Services, and the amount was just over $25,000. It was signed by Clarissa Kensington. "They're the landscaping company the HOA used," I said. Celeste nodded. "Except they're not real. We looked into business filings. No tax ID, no payroll, no active contracts with any municipality or registered supplier. It's a shell. We believe Clarissa used it to funnel HOA funds into a separate account." I leaned back. "That explains the padded invoices." She tapped the file. "We also found cash withdrawals totaling over $70,000 in the last 18 months. Most of it taken out from ATMs just across the state line. Any chance she had help?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out a document that made my stomach dip. "This is a list of HOA board votes over the last 2 years. You'll notice something strange. Clarissa, her cousin Martin, and a third board member, Tasha Fields, voted unanimously on every single expenditure. No dissent, no abstentions, even when the amounts exceeded discretionary limits, which means they bypassed the required resident approval thresholds." "Exactly." She pulled out another folder. "And then there's this." It was a copy of a permit application. Altered. My signature forged. "They tried to backdate access approval across your easement," she said. "Filed 6 months ago, claiming you'd signed off on permanent community access. But the signature doesn't match your official filings. We've got a handwriting analyst on it." "So they knew they were vulnerable," I said. Celeste finally leaned in. "This is bigger than just mailboxes and street access. We're talking about financial fraud, forgery, and potentially organized misuse of public funds. We've also discovered that Clarissa applied for a county beautification grant using falsified photos of community upgrades, none of which were ever completed. I clenched my jaw. She applied for public money and received $10,000 last spring, Celeste said. We have no record of how it was spent. I left the building with a sudden, heavy clarity. This wasn't just a neighborhood power trip. This was embezzlement, fraud, and active deception on a scale none of us had imagined. Back at home, I installed another motion-activated camera near the mailbox. Not that I expected a repeat, but if someone was bold enough to leave threats taped to my door, I wasn't taking chances. That evening, Denise knocked. She didn't have her usual gardening gloves or calm demeanor. Ron heard something weird from a guy who used to be on the finance subcommittee, she said without preamble. He told Ron there was a second set of books, a handwritten ledger. Clarissa kept it in a locked drawer in the HOA office. She never turned over the keys, I said. Nope, but her cousin Martin still has access. He's been seen going in and out of that building after hours. I didn't hesitate. I called Celeste and relayed the information. She told me to stay out of it, but I could already feel the neighborhood shifting again. People were done waiting. That night, I met with half a dozen homeowners in my garage. Denise, Ron, Camila, and a few others. We talked strategy, not vengeance. We wanted accountability, not chaos. I printed out copies of the HOA bylaws, highlighted the emergency clause that allowed for a temporary audit committee, and we voted unofficially, but decisively to form one. The next day, we filed the paperwork with the county clerk. Within 48 hours, we had legal standing to request access to all HOA records. Martin tried to stonewall us, claiming the files were in storage. That's when Celeste stepped in. She arrived in an unmarked car with 2 officers in tow and a warrant in hand. They unlocked the HOA office and found the ledger in the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, wrapped in a manila envelope labeled, "Do Not Touch. HOA Business Only." Celeste flipped it open and whistled. Well. There you are. The ledger contained handwritten notes detailing every off-the-books transaction, payments to Wexler Property Services, cash reimbursements to board members, a line item labeled "Quiet Fee" next to a resident's name, one who had abruptly stopped complaining about driveway restrictions after a fine was mysteriously waived. But one entry stood out. Legal retainer Wexler and Grange for lawsuit suppression, $8,500. Celeste raised an eyebrow. They paid a law firm to intimidate residents. She called it in. Within hours, a second round of arrests was made. Martin and Tasha were taken into custody for conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of funds, and obstruction. Their homes were searched, bank accounts frozen. The HOA's assets were seized pending a full audit. With the board dissolved, an interim committee was installed by the county. Denise was elected chair, Ron took over community operations, and Camila was put in charge of transparency and records. No one argued. No one protested. The neighborhood had reached its breaking point and passed it. With the old regime gone, things started to fall back into place. Residents who had been fined unfairly saw their penalties reversed. The illegal amendments Clarissa had pushed through without quorum were nullified. And for the first time, the HOA opened its books to the public. I kept my distance. I didn't want a seat at the table, just peace on my property. But I did meet with Denise one last time. She brought over a small wooden box. "We had this made," she said, "from the original post you used for your mailbox." Inside was a small plaque, brass, polished, with 6 words etched into it. "Respect isn't granted. It's earned back." I nodded. "It's a start." She hesitated. "You know, the county offered to name the easement after you." "Don't," I said. "Let the street keep its name. People will remember what happened here without it being carved into a sign." She smiled, not the kind of smile that boasts, but the kind that says you've made it through the storm. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The day the court ruling came down, I was halfway through re-leveling the concrete edging in my front yard. Not for any aesthetic reason, just old habit. I like things to sit right. A county clerk in a blue sedan pulled up, stepped out holding a thick envelope, and walked straight up to me. "Mr. Hartley?" "Yeah." She handed it over. "Certified court notice. You're listed as both a witness and the original complainant. County wants you present for the final hearing next week." I signed the form, and she left without another word. Inside the envelope was a copy of the civil judgment. Clarissa, Martin, and Tasha were being charged with financial misconduct, forgery, and unlawful tampering with federal property. But the part that got me really made me stop and read it 3 times was the restitution clause. The court had ruled that the HOA, under its former leadership, owed the homeowners over $140,000 in misappropriated funds. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a full dismantling. I showed up to the hearing the following Tuesday wearing my work boots and a clean shirt. Didn't feel right showing up polished when half the people in that courtroom had spent years being stepped on by people in blazers and pearl earrings. Clarissa sat 2 rows ahead of me, flanked by her lawyer. No eye contact. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. She didn't speak once. Martin and Tasha looked even worse, pale, sunken. They'd been denied bail after the second round of charges, and it showed. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with silver-rimmed glasses, called the room to order and began reading through the charges. Every time she listed another instance of financial tampering or procedural fraud, you could feel the tension in the courtroom shift. Not explosive, just the quiet, collective realization that the people running our neighborhood hadn't just been petty. They'd been criminal. When it came time for the restitution allocation, the judge called me to the front. "Mr. Hartley, you were the first to bring this to the county's attention. Do you have anything to add before sentencing?" I nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. I just want the record to show that this wasn't about revenge. I didn't go after them for tearing out a mailbox. I went after them because they believed they could do whatever they wanted without consequences." That mindset, that's what wrecks communities. Not weeds in the yard or mismatched shutters. Corruption, silence, and abuse of authority. That's what needs fixing. She nodded once, and then turned back to the bench. Duly noted. Clarissa was sentenced to 30 months, with eligibility for parole after 18. Martin and Tasha each got 2 years. All 3 were barred from holding any position in a registered HOA in the state for life. After the hearing, I stepped outside into the afternoon sun and spotted Denise and Ron waiting near the courthouse steps. They looked tired but content. Denise pulled a folded paper from her bag. "We finalized the new charter. Full transparency, open elections, no more board-only clauses." Ron nodded. "And we're putting term limits in place. No more lifers." I asked, "You think it'll stick?" Denise gave me a look like she'd been waiting for that question. "It'll stick because we're not letting it slide anymore. People are awake now. Back in the neighborhood, changes came fast. The interim committee held elections within 30 days. Every candidate had to participate in a public Q&A on the community green. No closed doors. No hidden agendas. Camila ran and won by a landslide. She wasn't flashy, but she really listened. One of her first moves was dissolving the contract with Wexler and Grange. She hired a new legal firm, one that specialized in HOA reform and had 0 ties to anyone in the old board. They volunteered to help audit every standing fine and complaint from the last 3 years. Over 200 residents had their records cleared. The barricades on Brookstone Lane came down ceremonially. Not with a bang, but with a community breakfast. Someone brought a grill. Someone else brought cinnamon rolls. We set up folding tables right over the section of road that had sparked the whole thing. Someone, probably Ron, painted a faint white line across the pavement with the words, "This is where it changed." I didn't talk much that morning, just watched. Kids were drawing chalk hearts and robots on the sidewalk. Neighbors were handing out coffee. Camila gave a short speech, nothing dramatic, just a thank you to everyone who'd stood up when it counted. Later that week, I got a visit from a man in a charcoal suit and dusty boots. Introduced himself as Deputy Director Harlan Shaw from the State Department of Property Oversight. "We're compiling a report," he said. "Your case is going to be used in training materials for new HOA board members. State wants to make sure this kind of overreach doesn't happen elsewhere." "Glad to hear it," I said. He paused. "One more thing. We're reviewing Clarissa's grant applications. There's evidence she submitted falsified community support letters. If it checks out, that could kick this up to federal level." I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know how deep the rot went. I'd done my part. The mailbox? It still stood. Same design. Same spot. But it wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a reminder, quiet and unassuming, that even the smallest injustice can uncover something rotten if you dig deep enough. A few weeks later, I started getting requests. Other neighborhoods. Small towns. People asking if I'd be willing to help them review their HOA charters, look over easement agreements, spot the cracks before things got worse. I agreed to one, then another, then 5 more. Not because I wanted to be a watchdog, but because I knew exactly how it felt to be pushed to the edge over something that wasn't just about rules, it was about respect. So yeah, the HOA removed my mailbox. But what they really did, they reminded an entire neighborhood that silence helps no one, and that the law, when used right, can be sharper than any clipboard or citation form. And that was the last time anyone in our neighborhood confused authority with control.